Welcome back, Officers of the Republic. Is your Coruscant Underworld Police Chief AP Gaines here, and excuse the appearance. I both feel, look, and sound terrible because of finals, but we'll get through it. Just a couple more days. Actually, by a couple more days, I mean like a week and a half. But we'll survive. We're going to talk about the meta. We're going to talk about GAC Meta, how it's changing, how it has changed, and how it will change. And we're going to talk about different aspects of the game because some of you guys are new to the game. Some of you guys are still in the mid game. Some of you guys are late game, and you guys want to know how the GAC meta is going to change because there is a lot of confusion all over the community at the moment as to, will this no longer work? Will this work? What's this being added? Is this OP? We're going to break it down for you. So I'm just going to open up like my standard GAC board. Nothing crazy going on here. It's just the setup phase, but I'm going to use it as a backdrop to explain really quickly some key principles for some of you newer players, because I know both new, mid, and late game players watch my videos. So basically, in the very early game, you got your 4 zones, your opponent got your 4 zones. You're going to want to protect your top zone right here because eventually you're going to want to have more banners than your opponent. And in the first couple of divisions, this fleet node back here with 1 ship is worth like, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's like 148 to the bottom zones, 1 character is 140. So technically, if you can only clear 2 zones, the front top zone and the back top zone are going to be the most efficient, highest banners, especially because against ships, if you undersize some ships, you can get some more banners than you could otherwise against, characters and stuff like that. It is harder to get those higher banners. You got to have 7-star ships so you can undersize with a bigger margin, yada, yada, yada. But generally, you want to go up top. So in the very early game, not a lot of people are going to be very efficient with their accounts or really know what they're doing. So that's why people who are, organized, people who are efficient, people who are on top of their stuff before it happens are going to be, it's basically impossible to lose in division, 11 and 10. There is the chance you will go against a person who is also a skilled player. I'm assuming you guys are all probably pretty skilled players. Even if you're new to the game, if you guys are watching Swigo videos, you understand how team comps work, you understand how counters work, you guys are probably pretty skilled. And at the end of the day, the most important thing to winning a GAC, of course, in any game, is the actual skill of the player. So I'm assuming that you guys all have like a baseline skill, but there's going to be a lot of players who either don't watch videos, aren't caught up with how teams work, are just playing for fun, and those characters or those players you're going to meet more often in the very beginning of the game. So as long as you have a couple of good teams, of course, feel free to do whatever you want. I push my own farming guide because in my personal opinion and through actual data of me, the free-to-play account and the thousands of you who've been trying it out, it's pretty hard to lose, but there is other people who have other differing opinions, and if you are interested in maybe a potential other farming guide, of course you can go look elsewhere for those. Just be warned. In my humble opinion, they just are not as good, but that's obviously up for debate. So the reason I believe, especially in the early and mid-game, that the AP Gains Guide is superior is because while other people push specific end-game characters who are very good and very hard to beat, and our strategy revolves around completely ignoring them, in the early to mid-game, we are going to be focusing on stronger teams. Some teams even in here, like in the free-to-play count, like we have a Jedi Knight Revan team. We have a Darth Revan team. We got Bounty Hunters, we got Padme, we got CLS, we got all sorts of those. Those are good if Galactic Legends are by themselves in A tier. If A tier only comprises of Galactic Legends, B tier comprises of Darth Vader, Gas, Jedi Knight Luke. C tier revolves around everything else. D and F tier are kind of your weaker teams. We want to get those C tier. Of course, you could say Darth Revan, Jedi Knight Revan, CLS. These teams are really good. They're comparable to Vader, to Jedi Knight Luke, to Gas because they can counter. I'll put them in C tier. Really, they have their place in B tier. I'm just making it simple. I'm going to call them C tier characters. Of course, it makes them sound weaker than they are, but just for clarification purposes, I'll just refer to them as C tier teams, even though in actuality, they're all fantastic teams that everyone needs to have, especially in the late game. So while your opponent is going to be farming up F and D tier teams in order to get an A tier team in a Galactic Legend or a B tier team in a Gas Jedi Knight Luke, everyone's going to have Vader, so I'm not going to leave Vader in there. We're going to be farming up those C tier teams, which are just as good as our Gases and our Jedi Knight Lukes in some situations if we use them properly, but much, much better than those D and F tier teams. So because of that, we're going to be able to place on a hard defense and have teams on offense we know can beat our opponents. So Division 10, or Division 11, Division 10, even Division 9, basically surefire wins no matter what. Even as you're starting to hone your skills as a player, if you're new, or maybe you haven't been playing in the early game because you got a later game account and you're still trying to figure out how the ebb and flow of the early game is, you're going to be at a huge advantage. Then we go to the mid game. I'm going to call, let's just, for the sake of argument, let's call the mid game 2 million to 4 million galactic power. Obviously, that's a 2 million range, which is the entire range of the early game. But for the sake of argument, just the sake of clarity for this video, let's just call the mid game that 2 to 4 million GP range. In the early 2 to 2.5 to 3 million GP, you're still going to come across a lot of players who don't have Galactic Legends. In fact, the player I'm facing this week is like an ultimate ability, Relic 7, full SLKR team. He's got his SLKR, but well, you notice he has that A tier team, and then in the first order and stuff, he's got that D and F tier teams as well. He has a nice Grievous, so I'll give him that. But the characters he's missing out on with those D and F tier teams, although he does have the A tier team, we make up for over here. If we go in here, let me filter by power because of course I got some favorites. We have those C tier teams, those Padmes, those Grievouses, those CLSs, both Revens, stuff like that. So on average, our account has more good teams than his account. But he does have that A tier account, or the A tier team, which he'll likely place on defense either to protect ships, and then he'll go hard here, weak here, save a bunch for offense, hope he can clear me, which he won't. Because of that, we have more, on average, good teams. He's going to place his best team on defense. He's not going to have teams that are going to be beating my teams. Now, yes, his second team, or maybe even his Grievous, if he goes, since he has weaker droids, he goes in, he can, double shot with some teams. He can beat, some of these teams, but he's not going to clear the zones, right? So because of that, I have a huge advantage over this player. Now, let's say we progress to 3.5, 4 million GP, and I still don't have a Galactic Legend. That's why, of course, at the 2.5 to 3 million GP range, or, if you're more efficient, you can even say in the 2.5 to 2 million range, if you're super efficient, we start to farm towards that Galactic Legend, because if he has 2 Galactic Legends, he can throw 1 top, 1 bottom, save literally everything for offense. And in that situation, if he farms up enough of those C tier teams, those CLSs, those Darth Revens, those Jedi Knight Revens, those Grievouses, those even a couple of B tier teams like GAS, Jedi Knight Luke, he's going to be at a huge 2 Galactic Legend advantage. That's why after we farm up the AP Gains core teams, we want to progress towards that Galactic Legend. So we have the better teams, and we have a Galactic Legend. So we're going to still be able to be in a better overall spot than him. Of course, we're going to rely a lot on our skill and our strategy on placing defenses and stuff like that. I'm pointing around with my hands like you guys can see my entire body. So that's why it's important that you don't get 2 Galactic Legends behind. 1 is totally fine. 1 actually puts you in a big advantage. But as he progresses towards 2, yes, he'll have more D and F tier teams. But once you get to the mid game, 2 to 4 million GP, those D and F tier teams are still relic characters, and relic characters are still good. Like, let me just go into my squads real quick. A perfect example, like an F tier team that I have in my GAC squads, if we go all the way down here. What's a good example of an F tier team? This team right here, a Basilisk Sean-led Mace Windu, Aayla Secura, Qui-Gon Jinn, like Gear 8 Plo Koon. This is an F tier team, but with a solid leadership that has good synergy. Shout out to the Dream Meme team if you guys are still watching at this point. Comment Dream Meme team. A solid leadership with good synergy, not great characters, sorry Rambam, but a couple of relics. I get 60 banners with this team all the time, especially against stronger teams, and that's totally fine. As you progress into that late game, those D and those F tier teams are going to be more viable, which is why we need to make sure that our C and B teams become stronger. Like a C team at General Grievous, I got a strong General Grievous team. Maybe I bump up these to Relic 5 to go here. Once I get gas to 7 stars, because mine's like 6 stars and some change, it's going to be really important, especially with the gas buff, that I get my clones up and running. Right now, I don't need a ton out of the clones because they're under Shock T lead and not gas. But once that gas is 7 stars, starts to become relic, it's going to be really important that I have a strong B tier team, because I'm going to have a Galactic Legend, but I'm going to start facing people with 2 Galactic Legends, and I'm going to need that B tier team to place on defense. If we go up here, like Treya is a D tier team, but it has its good viability. Maybe with a couple of good mod selections or some relics on this team, plus a Thrawn. You can counter Padme. You can, of course, obviously the classic Geo counter Mon Mothma, which becomes more prevalent. Bounty Hunters are a D tier team, but with some good relics, they can punch up. With some good leaderships, we can take out Darth Revan. If we're fast enough, we can take out lots of great teams. C tier teams like CLS, like a CLS relic would obviously bring up 3PO and Chewie. 3PO and Chewie coming up to relics, as well as C3PO for some viability. The best defensive non-galactic legend team, that's going to be fantastic for my defense, especially if I start to place against higher and higher, more high GP players. Even though it'll be a lower GP, I'll still have better teams. I'll be in a good spot. Jedi Knight Revan still kind of stays the same. He has the same viability at Relic 1 as he does at full Relic 5s, Relic 7s. You use him to counter the same thing. It's just he happens to be stronger. Same with Padme. You kind of utilize her in the same situations, even if she's higher Relic. Darth Revan, you get fast enough speed, good for mirror matches, good to place on defense. Requires a solid counter, but we'll draw some of your opponents out. So yeah, that's the early and the mid game. The late game, especially because counters that we know and love are not going to be viable anymore. The meta in the end game, especially if we say equal galactic legends, relic out of their mind, we're talking 4 to 6 to 10 million, 4 to 10 million GP. It's obviously a huge range. You're going to go against comparable players because they broke down the divisions a little bit better now. But let's just say all of our opponents are you and your opponent. You're comparable. The meta is really going to evolve around the new counters that come to the game, staying on top of the meta, watching lots of videos, keeping your eye out for counters because those counters are going to exist. The devs have accidentally confirmed that non-galactic legend, galactic legend counters, free-to-play galactic legend counters are still going to exist. We're going to have to find them. They're not going to be a sure thing. Maybe with some good mod selections, some good speed, turn order, stuff like that, they'll become viable. Maybe you have to two-shot a galactic legend, but staying on top of that, knowledge is really going to be the meta in the later game over in the early and mid game, where just having good characters puts you at a huge advantage. So for you endgame players, you 4 million to 10 million players, it's going to be really important that you keep up to date, because if you have 5 galactic legends, your opponent has 5 galactic legends, and you don't understand a new counter just came out right before GAC lock-in, and your opponent mods for that counter, they get everything in order, and they plan around that counter, and then all of a sudden you're looking at your loss, and you go back in your swigo.gg, and you're like, wow, he didn't use a galactic legend, and he beat my SLKR, he beat my Rey, he beat my C, whatever galactic legend you place on defense. He had that knowledge advantage, and you're going to lose because of it. So the meta is really early game, is any knowledge whatsoever. Mid game, it's having those on average better C tier teams plus a couple B tier teams to beat out those galactic legends players. At the end game, it's really going to be, are you on your game? Are your matchups precise? Do you know what you're doing? Have you planned? Do you have that accumulated skill from playing all the way up until the end game? Are you going to be able to compete with your opponent? And that's really how the meta is going to shake out now and into the future. Obviously, more characters are going to come out. There's going to be a new galactic legend. How is that power struggle going to go on? There's going to be a new ship. Is that new ship going to be unbeatable for Malevolence and Negotiator? Probably not. But those are something that we don't know yet because those kits haven't been revealed, so I don't want to speculate too much on that. But as always, I love you guys, and I'll see you later. And I really hope that I press the button to turn on my audio. That would really suck if I talked for 13 minutes and 37 seconds and none of it was recording. All right, guys. Bye-bye. Kisses on the forehead? Kiss me on the forehead? I kissed you. Did you kiss me? I'll assume you did.